Zoo, considered one of the finest in the world. The spacious National Zoological Park is situated on 160 magnificently landscaped acres, originally designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who also landscaped Central Park in New York. Created in 1889, the National Zoo is home to more than 5,000 animals of 500 species, including two of the zoo's most popular residents, the giant pandas given to the people of the United States by the People's Republic of China. The zoo's Conservation and Research Center is dedicated to the study and preservation of endangered species. Washington, wrote James Fenimore Cooper in 1838, has certainly an air of more magnificence than any other American town. It is mean in detail, but the outline has a certain grandeur about it. Besides the Capitol, the Washington Monument is probably the most recognizable structure on the Washington skyline. At 555 feet, it's the world's tallest masonry structure. L'Enfant's original plan put this monument slightly west of where it now stands. He wanted it to lie at precisely the axis where the White House would face the direct east-west line along the Mall at a 90-degree angle. Unfortunately, the Mall was too soggy to support the structure, and it was positioned a little to the east. Though planners first conceived of the monument in 1783, 16 years before Washington's death, work didn't begin until 1848, and it wasn't completed until 1884. Construction was slowed by a lack of funds, and interrupted by the Civil War, and another peculiar occurrence. A block of marble from Rome sent by Pope Pius IX was to have been included in a wall of the monument. But the marble was stolen in 1854. Religious and political disfavor caused contributions to fall to a new low. Until this time, the monument had been supported solely by private contributions. But lack of funds had slowed construction on a number of occasions. This time, work on the monument stopped and wasn't resumed again until the government took over the job in the 1870s. By that time, the marble was taken from a different level of the quarry and was noticeably darker. Even today, it's apparent that the color of the marble in the monument changes past a point 150 feet up. The second great presidential memorial in Washington is the magnificent Lincoln Memorial. It was from the steps of this monument and in the spirit of its namesake that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to the hearts and hopes of the nation.
I say to you today, my friend, let freedom ring. When we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Completed in 1922, the structure is a rectangular Doric temple reminiscent of the Parthenon in Greece. The 36 columns represent the 36 states in the Union at the time of Lincoln's death. Inside, the pensive figure of Lincoln sits surrounded by the words of his most memorable speeches. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Said the poet Walt Whitman, he was a mountain in grandeur of the soul. He was a sea and deep undervoice of mystic loneliness. He was a star in steadfast purity of purpose and service, and he abides. Those seeking a less traditional view of the Lincoln Memorial can join a tour inside the structure's foundation.
Inside the chamber, the statue altogether weighs 475 tons, and right now we are underneath the statue itself. So these are pretty huge structures right here. These are hollow.
Humid conditions there have encouraged the growth of stalactites and stalagmites, making the space resemble a young cave. Back upstairs from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial is a majestic view. The third presidential memorial honoring Thomas Jefferson was authorized by Congress in 1934 and completed in 1943. The style of the memorial, a classical dome and colonnade, is in the style of the Parthenon in Rome. Inside, a 19-foot bronze statue of Jefferson stands in solemn tribute to the man who dared to conceive a great nation. Choosing the site for the Jefferson Memorial was a difficult task, since it had not been included in L'Enfant's master plan. Ultimately, the memorial was built on land reclaimed from the Potomac River, the portion now known as the Tidal Basin. It was at the Tidal Basin in 1912 that Mrs. William Howard Taft planted the first cherry trees, a gift from Japan. The first efforts to grow the beautiful trees here failed miserably, causing a great deal of embarrassment. The first 2,000 trees were infested with insects and disease and had to be burned. 2 years later, a second shipment arrived in Seattle and was sent by train to Washington. Each spring, the blooming of these trees, which only lasts a week or two, is celebrated in the National Cherry Blossom Festival. Only about 60 of the original trees from Japan are still alive, but the National Park Service has been replacing them with the help of private donations. Whatever we are looking for, wrote war historian Bruce Catton in 1959, we come to Washington in millions to stand in silence and try to find it. Thousands upon thousands have come to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, dedicated to the 58,000 servicemen and women lost in Vietnam. At all hours of the day and night, they come and stand in silence, searching for those gone but not forgotten. For they are all here, their names etched deep into the polished granite and into the national memory. Once found, many names are rubbed onto paper, touching evidence of a life ended far too soon, too far from home. In 1984, Frederick Hart's life-size sculpture of 3 Vietnam soldiers was built at the entrance to the plaza. And in 1993, Glenna Goodacre immortalized the women who also served in Vietnam by designing a statue of 3 nurses tending a wounded soldier. Behind the black wall, another memorial, unveiled in 1995, recognizes the veterans of the Korean War. When President Kennedy died in 1963, his family requested that any memorial to the slain president be a living memorial. With their request in mind, the planned National Cultural Center in Washington was named the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and dedicated to his memory. Here, an opera house, concert hall, 2 dramatic theaters, and a cinema provide an ongoing menu of cultural events. It's a fitting tribute to the president who called for a new frontier for American art. Compared to its neighbor to the north, New York City, Washington used to be called a hick town that closed early, offering few cultural attractions, if any. But in recent years, the district has changed its image. Besides those at the Kennedy Center, theatergoers can find productions to suit any taste. The theater of greatest renown, however, is Ford's Theater, site of President Lincoln's assassination. In 1968, Ford's Theater was restored to its 1865 appearance and reopened. Today, theatergoers can still gaze up to the presidential box, decorated as it was on the April night when Lincoln was shot. It is unlike any other museum in the world. It documents the darkest moment of the 20th century, a time when civilization went terribly, terrifyingly awry. It takes 3 hours to go through, and every visitor views every exhibit. Yet the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has had long lines almost since the day it opened. Visitors are issued an identity card as they enter, stamped with the name of a Holocaust victim. They learn what was happening at the time to the person whose card they carry. Opened in 1993, the Holocaust Museum simultaneously commemorates those who perished and warns the living of the terrible dangers of prejudice and fanaticism. It is a frightening reminder of the fragile nature of freedom. In Washington, there is no life apart from government and politics, wrote one resident at the turn of the century. It's our daily bread. It is the thread which runs through the woof and warp of our lives. It colors everything. More than in any other city, social and political activities are virtually indistinguishable. At the end of a busy day in private homes, restaurants, and hotel lobbies, the business of government goes on. The Wardman Tower of the Washington Sheraton Hotel, for example, was once the setting for some of the city's most famous social occasions. Penny Cummings, the hotel's director of public relations, explains the phenomenon.
In fact, it is said that more business is conducted at parties in the evening than is conducted in offices in the daytime. Matter of fact, one of the most famous social hostesses in Washington was Pearl Mesta, who lived here at the Sheraton, Washington in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, and was known as the hostess with the mostest. She was famous for her lavish parties for diplomats and celebrities and government officials, and these were so popular they were well covered by the daily newspapers, which reported it as news regularly.
Interestingly, Mester herself never paid for the lavish entertaining in the apartment, which is now a hotel suite. Associations and lobbyists were more than happy to foot the bill in exchange for her valuable introductions to influential people. While the District of Columbia covers roughly 68 square miles, the Washington metropolitan area encompasses more than 2,000 square miles and includes parts of Maryland and Virginia. Two communities in particular, one in the district and the other just outside, evoke strong feelings of more peaceful colonial times. In 1802, the city of Georgetown was chartered in its own right, though some called it a city of houses without streets, while nearby Washington was called a city of streets without houses. The city charter was revoked by Congress in 1871, and Georgetown became just a section within the federal district. Once a charming area of cobblestone streets and townhouses, the Georgetown area deteriorated until Eleanor Roosevelt took an interest in restoring the neighborhood in the 1930s. Since then, Georgetown has been restored and is today one of the district's most exclusive and prestigious addresses. Just across the river in nearby Virginia is the hometown of both George Washington and Robert E. Lee. A colonial port town that revels in its history, Alexandria is undergoing a major renovation and restoration. The area called Old Town is filled with restaurants and shops. Wrote one observer in 1874, "Never till the Capitol had cost the life of the beautiful and the brave of our land did it become, to the heart of the American citizen of the